Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. We're going to do this video series to hopefully kick off what I hope will turn into a more active channel that it first set out to be, as well as did a little rebranding. So, before we get into this, I just want to lay down some groundwork up to what's expected of this series. Each video will have a link to the next month's build request form. So here's a quick rundown of how to fill out this form. First, we have your budget. This does not include taxes, fees, or Windows keys. Then we have our type of system, if you want it to be gaming, a workstation, combined, or anything else you want to say. Any areas of focus, do you want to focus on the CPU, the cooling, any area of focus you want. And then we have requests at the end, which include anything you either want to see on this form, as well as any peripherals or anything you want included in this entire budget to be built. At the end of each month, I will take all the data and average it out for the following month's build. Links will be found in the description below. To start this series and the month of April off, we're going to do a nice $1,500 USD build. Quick disclaimer, the budget builds will be as close or slightly over budget due to parts, any sales going on at the recorded time, as well as, again, we are not including OS keys or peripherals unless asked otherwise. Unless we have budgetary constraints, 4 builds will be coming out of this, 2 AMD and 2 Intel, both on the previous and newest generation. This is to ensure flexibility and upgradability to future-proof it. At the end of the video, we will be comparing each system to each other and displaying the pros and cons of each build, so then we can figure out which is the best build for the current price. So, let's get started with AM4. Explaining the rationale behind every component selection can be incredibly helpful in understanding the overall design process and ensuring that all decisions are informed and intentional. However, due to time constraints, we will be having to skip ahead and focus on the final outcome. Since we're only really comparing the CPU and the motherboard and possibly the RAM across all these builds, things like the CPU cooler and the storage and everything after that is all going to stay the same across these builds. So let's check out what we have for our AM4. Just a quick editor's note here. I might say this a few times throughout the build process, but it's important to keep in mind that this is all user preference, apart from, let's say, the CPU and the motherboard, possibly the memory. You can change the CPU cooler to whatever you want, the case, maybe the graphics card if you wanted to swap it out. Let's say you currently have a graphics card on hand, then you can end up putting that money for the graphics card and buying something else. So all in all, nothing's set in stone, and this is all based on preference and visual needs of the user. So let's get back into the video. So here's our AM4 build. We have a Ryzen 7 5700X. Base of 3.4, boost to 4.8. It's an 8-core, 16-thread processor. Our CPU cooler is a 360mm rad AIO, comes with 3 fans. You can change it out to even a stock-styled air cooler for even half the price. It's user preference. Our motherboard pretty much fit the criteria I wanted. It met all the requirements, as well as it's not like some alternative $400 Asus motherboards. Moving on is our G-Skill Ripjaws RAM. Now this is a 16 gig kit, DDR4 3600, CL16. Now this is faster than the Corsair alternatives, and it's cheaper. Now we could have gone for a 32 gig kit, but our current budget doesn't really give us enough wiggle room, seeing as how we're already $7 over budget. You could end up dropping this AIO for something cheaper and putting 32 gigs of memory. Storage, on the other hand, it's pretty much adequate. This was just to see what I could do. You can get a Western Digital Crucial Kingston cheaper alternative, and it's still a Gen 4 SSD. And this one is just a nice 3.0 2TB SSD. You can change that out for a hard drive, pretty much whatever meets your criteria and your preference and what you need for it. Our video card is a nice 3060 Ti. I haven't looked at any Radeon cards, so I don't know if there are better alternatives. There probably are for the same price or a little bit cheaper, but a nice 3060 Ti is great for today's gaming. Case, again, user preference. I went with a 4000D airflow, comes with 2 fans. Again, it's in the name, airflow, pretty good. And to finish off, we have our 850 watt Corsair fully modular ATX power supply, and it's 80 plus gold. This thing should have a lot more than enough power to handle our system. So now we finished out explaining everything. Now let's move on to our LGA 1200 build. So just looking at this build, we can see that a lot of the components are the same, and I tried to explain this earlier, but I'll say it quickly again. We're really only comparing the motherboard and the CPU for this previous generation of components. Now this is a 6-core 12-thread base clock 3.9 boost to 4.9, and this MSI Z590 board is almost identical to that AMD board that we have. Almost identical. But it pretty much fits, again, that criteria. And then everything else stays the same. Now I got to take this build, and I have to build a nice AM5 and LGA 1700 out of it. Here we have our Ryzen 5 7600X. It's a 4.9 GHz boost to 5.2 GHz, 6-core 12-thread processor, as well as our Gigabyte B650M. This is a micro ATX board. There are ATX board alternatives, but if you pretty much are fine with a mini ATX board, I would just go for this one. It fits all the criteria we were originally looking for, even when it came to the previous generation and the previous builds. And then we have a 32 gig kit of memory. Even with this 32 gig kit, we are still under budget by $12. You can swap out this for a 16 gig kit, get more storage, probably get a better CPU. It's all user preference, but for what it is, honestly, we're just looking for a nice $1,500 base system for the most part, and this pretty much fits all that criteria. Finally, we have our nice LGA 1700. It's funny, if you look at the i5 12600KF, we had a 11600KF for our previous build, except this one is a 10-core 16-thread. And then we have our Z790P, again, fits our criteria of what we wanted. And I mean, that's about it for all of our builds. Now we have to figure out which one of these is the winner. Before we look at our CPUs to determine which one we want in our build, we're just going to take a look at our motherboards, do a quick rundown, and highlight any key differences between all of them. For the most part, they do the same as each other, but again, we'll just do a quick rundown. First, we have our memory speeds. This will vary from motherboard to motherboard, but most motherboards can handle a common clock speed for memory. Most of the time you'll be fine. Just still suggesting to keep your eye out on this section when it comes to choosing a motherboard. PCIe 16, the only difference we can see is that our AM5 board has one less, and that's only because it's a micro ATX board and not a full-size ATX board. The same thing can be said about our PCIe 1X slot. Each board has at least one, but it's a micro ATX board, so it won't. M.2 slots, the only real key difference we can see is the different M.2s you can use size-wise. But again, each board at least has 2 M.2 slots. Following this, we have our 6 gig SATA ports. Each board has 6 except for our micro ATX board. Again, it's a smaller board, so we're going to have less spots for that. Our USB 3.2, we have our USB headers. So we have the USB 3.2 Gen 1, Gen 2, and Gen 2x2. For Gen 1, all of them at least have 1. For Gen 2, all of them except for our micro ATX board has 1, but our micro ATX board has a Gen 2x2 slot. Wi-Fi, everything has Wi-Fi 6 except for our newer gen, which has Wi-Fi 6E, and then price is the last real comparison. And then if we just do a side-by-side comparison of previous and newest gen, it just highlights all the same key differences. Now we can see what kind of CPU we want and finalize these builds. So here we can see the CPU benchmarks and the comparing of all of our 4 CPUs. Now right off the bat, we can see that the 11600KF is actually the worst out of the bunch when it comes to CPU performance. Actually, we can see it overall because it costs more to run, uses more power. I guess when it comes to comparing the computers, we should actually just get rid of this and now see what we got. So just by running these numbers and everything based on what this CPU mark gives us, the Ryzen 5 7600X is our clear winner. So that brings us here, our Ryzen 5 7600X, our Deep Cool AIO, our Gigabyte B650M with 32 gigs of RAM, our nice 1TB SSD, a 3060 Ti, our 4000D airflow, and our 850 watt gold Corsair power supply. Yeah, that's our clear winner for this month's build. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to fill out that Google form, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you all in the next one.